And I think I got this out of Kennedy's book. Almost all the universities in the world were started or founded by Christians.
I wouldn't say in the world, because the Islamic world has valued education and study in some ways, more for the elite, but certainly in America and England, even the Ivy League schools, the oldest, I think all but one were started by churches, Christians. Even where we live in the West, the Northwest schools, George Fox, Willamette,
Oregon State, Methodist.
Oregon State.
Methodist preachers.
Oh, really?
Washington State is also a Christian, what is that, Saturday?
Seventh-day Adventist. Yeah. So anyway, science and its Christian roots, I think it was brought up yesterday, the whole concept of being able, you guys help me here, I can't think of it right now, but just the birth of science, that the world in which we see, the physical world also created by God, is knowable. And there's a system to it, and there's orderliness. Therefore, you can do investigation, you can do scientific research, you can measure, you can weigh, and so Newton and Galileo, many of these people were influenced by thoughts of Christianity and theology, and God himself. God is orderly. And
Einstein even said that.
huh?
Even Einstein
Right.
talked about the beliefs of a creator God.
Liberty and Justice. So one of these books down at the bottom, Neither King Nor Prelate, Religion and the Nation. Book. And that's about the United States and about many of the Reformation ideas, and I'll talk about that later, that were implemented, really lived out in America, and why some, not all, but some people came to America because of their sense of God's calling them there, as a chance for God to govern in the affairs of men and women, both from a political as well as a religious point of view. And again, there's debate by that, but I'm still, I guess, more of a traditionalist in that sense. Liberty and justice for all are really Christian concepts. They're more than concepts. They were the intentionality of those who came to America to do that. They did what God put in their hearts to do. So the abolishment of slavery, both in England and the United States, so it took many centuries. And there was conflict, in the Civil War that had something to do with that, not everything maybe, but certainly the core of that. A war, again, more Americans died on both North and South in the Civil War than all other wars the Americans have ever fought combined. 600,000 men in uniform, Union and Confederate, died. 1 million people died overall. So it was a very, very bloody, long 4+ year conflict. And though there was a military victory, even to this day, people of color or different ethnicities probably struggle in this country to know real freedom. We had a dear friend, and Dr. Bill Thomas, African American, that some of us know, greatly influenced by his intellect, his passion for the gospel, his simplicity, his faith, many things. But Dr. Bill, as we call him, rightly and in all respect, my assessment is that he moved away from America. He moved to France. In God's providence, he moved there. He was teaching English, met a lady from England. They married, and they stayed in Strasbourg, France. And one reason he stayed there is because he enjoyed the freedom. By that, I think it was he enjoyed the social acceptance that he never found in America. Again, that's only one story, one person, one place. But it certainly, to me, was, and again, it's my judgment and assessment, you know, from many conversations and I call him the one suitcase evangelist. I met Dr. Bill. We met in the Philippines. He had worked for Luis Palau, and we ended up together. My first ever trip I took working for the Palau team, and we shared a room together. And I had, you know, 2 suitcases bulging with, broke my back getting them up into the small room, you know.
Bill had one small suitcase.
And Bill had a suitcase about this big.
I know. That's true. I don't know how he does it.
And then he opened it up, and it was half empty. He had a couple changes of underwear, maybe one extra shirt, and that was it. He would wash his clothes every night, hang them up in the bathroom, and
I miss hearing him say, "Yes, brother." He's great.
yes, Jesus, yes, Jesus.
Jesus was right there.
Yeah. He was right there. So anyway.
I miss Bill. He's a great guy, great man.
Yep. So many issues through history that we can speak about. My point is of evangelists, not only knowing, using it in your preaching. We have a global message. This is global evangelist because Jesus is for all men. And history is an evidence of the power of the gospel to change lives and to address issues of sin. Shall we get there perfectly until Jesus comes? I don't think so, because I think that's why he has to come. To put everything right that we could not. Otherwise, why would he come back in history? So I believe he's coming back, and he will put everything right.
Amen.
So art and architecture, Francis Schaeffer, the Penner's book on the gift of sex, it's a great book, it's an older book. They're Mennonites for whatever reason, but they understand the gift of sex. So anyway, Gift of Music, beautiful book. It was some of the disciples of Francis Schaeffer, I believe, that wrote that, and read these a long time ago, but they're very profound. Then Francis Schaeffer uses a lot of historical, and again, he's really the only person that I have met in life that I would say was a prophet, though he didn't say he was a prophet. He was an intellect, he was an evangelist, but he studied the world in which he lived, and he had a great insight into the way people thought and reasoned and where those thoughts would lead if carried into action. And so what he said in the 60s and 70s has come true in terms of social life, culture, values, relationships, brokenness. So art and architecture, how it portrays Christianity. So music, the Christian imprint. And then in these books, what happens when the church fails? The church has failed many, many times. The church has failed. Why? Because we're all sinners. And so the church is always in need of renewal. And though maybe that is, I think, partly the role of the prophet, I think it's also the role of the evangelist. To call people back, we might say, to the simplicity of the gospel, but we also would say the profundity of the gospel. The power of the gospel to change not just a life in a moment, but it's the good news to be transformed as we go through life, but also for society to address social, political, economic things that without the gospel they always become very self-oriented, and you always have power centered in a few, whether it's an autocratic, totalitarian government, or it's what I think America tends to be, dominated by the wealthy and their extraordinary influence in every sphere of life just because they have money. and they have more and more money. And however that power is centered. And then another chapter, when biblical truth is removed from society, what happens? So I think we see what happens. Was it Mike saying we have a generation of college and university students that have never been to a church, never been in a church building, don't know really what Christian community fellowship is like, or the worship of God is like. So anyway, hopefully that stimulates yourself in reading and preparing and studying. We certainly haven't talked about Africa or India or Asia or other parts of the world. Christianity has touched everywhere in some way. Do you guys think Christianity has impacted your nation, India or Africa or your country?
Definitely education in India, and that has been like one of the Christian thing when it comes to English teaching and all. People do think about like Christian people have got this, and then hospitals and all this care thing, old age homes and things like that, orphanages. So definitely the Christianity has impacted that culture, the education and care, more like caring things.
Can I ask you a question? Within the church, Christian church in India, does the caste system continue, or do people come together?
We try not to. We teach as a pastor. We try to teach, but some churches still have that.
Too many.
Yeah, I think we would say 70% churches do that.
Okay.
Very few, like 30% or less than that, probably. When it comes to marrying your son or daughter, they always try and look the same.
Caste.
Yeah.
What about the, when the husband dies, the burning of the wife?
Not anymore. Not anymore.
William
I know
Perry took care of that.
legally It's not legal, but does it?
Yeah, but they, no, I mean, not killing or burning the wife though, but it's hard for her. It's hard for a woman there without a husband. It's very difficult.
For, what is it? Is it socially, getting a job, or just?
Yeah, getting a
The
job,
patriarchal
people really
society.
don't, always look down on her and,
So the children don't care for her?
yeah, but if children are young, then it is difficult.
Uh-huh.
That's why.
They don't remarry.
Very rarely, not many. Very rare.
Different in the city than in the village too. It's
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
different world.
Africa, what would you say? Kenya, Uganda, what impact has Christianity had?
Personally, firstly, there is a group of historians that sort of they would like to see, not distinguish clearly the impact of the Christianity and the colonialists. And so there's a school of thought that somehow tries to put them together and sort of preach the fact that Christianity was colonialism. But clearly there was a very clear distinction, and places that sort of embraced the missionaries have a great sense of development in terms of infrastructure, hospitals and health. And it's really amazing that even in places that the missionaries did a lot of work, most of even the first president, comes from an area and a community that embraced the missionaries. And so they were able to take off faster in terms of education, and it gave them quite some political mileage so on and so forth. Yeah, so there are all these kinds of thoughts. But I think even right now the African theologian is trying, like Arthur said, trying to distinguish what was Western and what was biblical. I think that's where the African theologian is today, trying to say, there are some aspects that were cultural, that were not necessarily evil, and there are some aspects that were culturally acceptable, but they were actually evil. So that's, I would say, the state of the African church, at least in my context.
Yeah. And Arthur's working on his project or thesis is about that. Particularly, if you're going to have empowerment and community development and growth, then you're going to have to abandon African traditional religion and practices and fully follow Christ. So, Stephen, what's your observations of the impact of Christianity in Kenya or East Africa? Do you see any particular things?
Yes, the church has been very vocal in fighting against the issues of abortion. Very vocal. The sanctity of life, sexual immorality. The church is always preaching for purity. And even in the music, when I was a young boy in the older generation, much of the music in the radio stations and in the TV used to be secular. But in recent years, the Christian music has cropped up, and it's common. It's common, unlike before.
And just radio.
Though they still play secular,
Right, they do pray Christian too.
they do play Christian too.
Uh-huh.
And maybe another observation I've made of late is about the third generation or the fourth generation from since when the missionaries left Africa. They have become somehow indifferent of Christianity. You find some of them were brought up in Catholic, in Methodist, those the early mainstream churches. The children, the grandchildren now, they're not interested in church. They're interested in secular things. So I believe that there is a great need for us as Africans to study the African tradition, religion, because most of their grandfathers and that old generation were warned by the missionaries through gifts, but not through total maybe conversion of the heart. So they are not able to pass over that mantle of faith, that mantle of faith to their children and the generations which are coming up. So I'm finding there is a great indifference. People, the young generation is not interested in church so much. There's not that dedication which used to be there before.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And atheism also.
Uh-huh.
In the cities,
Oh, thank you, Gary. Wow.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it. It was very uncommon to have atheists in Africa, but now there's quite a growth of atheism as young students can interact with philosophy and all that. I mean, it's almost like there were never cases of depression in Africa, but in Nairobi now I know there has been a lot of depression cases. The same things that the people in the West go through are the same that people are going through. There was depression wasn't something African, but it is now. Materialism, atheism, and so the preacher now in the city is almost preaching to an audience that thinks very close to how an audience would think in Germany or somewhere in the West. Because majority, like what I've seen is a majority of people ministering to the African church have an approach
like they would in the villages. And so the city guy won't find it irrelevant. I mean, like the Jesus films, I don't think they work now. You don't show a Jesus film in Nairobi and anybody is interested.
Huh.
If people are already past that, they don't want it. They don't want, that very simple presentation of the gospel. Many are like, it's not academic. And so there is a great need in the universities for apologetics and a more academic approach.
Well, take this outline and fill it in and challenge, all their thinking about, well, what has been the implication of Christianity in history and what changes have come about because of it, and say, well, how did atheism help the world? How did communism help Russia or China, and their ideas? So.
Many people, unlike before, we used to think of Africa like not a developed continent. There is an issue in London now concerning Africa because most of the assignments for students in Europe are done in Africa through the online sites.
Huh.
We are 95% now connected to the internet. So you can see the impact the internet has. There is a lot of Americanization, globalization taking place.
Yeah. I would think particularly in the universities and larger cities and where people come to study. And so
Yes.
the metropolitan areas globally are more alike than ever before.
Yes, there is a lot of revolution taking place. Nowadays, you cannot, if you came to America or to the big cities and you go back to the village, you used to appear like you have new news to the people. Nowadays, they know what is happening all over the world.
Ah, okay.
So my thinking is that we need to have a new approach for the African people because there is a lot of fighting against, they say the white man's religion.
Right.
That's how they term it. So that indifference comes from there. Like where I stay, they are constructing a shrine, an African shrine for diviners, divination. Those were, that was a no days tradition thing. And these things are coming up slowly by slowly. And nowadays, before you become a political leader, you have to go through the elders. And these elders are not Christians, not the Christian elders. Traditional kind of elders where they slaughter goats and all that, those sacrifices, all the sacrifices. So if you don't adhere to that, or adhere to that, you won't become popular. You won't have some kind of backup. So it is also a big challenge for Christian leaders who want to start upright in integrity. So you were saying with my brother here yesterday, what we need to focus more for now is to preach Jesus. And, because many evangelists in Africa have fallen. Fame, power, greed. There is a joining of politics in the church which has affected the image of the church a lot. So we need to preach Christ and the power of the risen Christ.
To the issues of the day and where people are, that we might be able to present to them the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, which really, in one sense comes to negate human effort, human will, human pride to justify ourselves before God and say, I can change my life, just give me a little time, I'll make it better. That's next, that's religion, that's humanism. The gospel of grace is when the individual understands that we are a sinner, not just that we sin, but our nature is against God. We have turned and joined forces with Satan to put ourselves at the center of our life. And that has to be replaced if we're to know and have a relationship, intimacy, knowing God personally, and the God who created us becomes our Redeemer. It's always by humility and God's grace and seeking mercy. But anyway, So, as I said, I think earlier, this paper was written a few years back. And again, but trying to address some of the historical things. So these books trace the history of ideas, concepts, and teachings of Christianity. They obviously address the impact of the gospel as is lived out in the lives of Christians across the globe and through time, through history since the time of Christ. The evangelist as a historian, one who engages with the flow and change of societies, must be concerned about the redemptive and productive impact of what we believe and preach. The evangelists of the gospel of Jesus Christ can stand on the evidence of historical impact of the gospel as well as on their personal experience. That last line, the evangelists of the gospel of Jesus Christ can stand, preach, live, be strengthened by the evidence of the historical impact of the gospel. That's primarily what this is. But to me, it falls in the category of what we would say testimony or witness of. And again, that's a major theological revelation. Jesus said, "You are my witnesses." The witness basically tells what they've seen, heard, experienced. It's their experience. It's their evaluation. It's their feelings. It's their ideas. And that's significant. And I argue we need more of it in the church. We need people, the lay people, the average Joe and Mary and whoever, telling us what God's doing in their life. And remove professionalism in some sense and a hierarchy from the church. We don't need to hear only from the leaders of the church. We need to hear the church. Since that's what Jesus said, "You are my witnesses," but they never get to say anything. Odd. But so here, then the others are personal story, personal experience. And again, I've greatly influenced and learned so much from Luis Palau. In my opinion, his preaching is biblical, it's principles from Bible, and then he illustrates it by people's lives. So it's not to condemn us, it's to give us a path of this is what life dignity. And maybe sometimes it seems the church has restricted individuals, but actually I think if you read historically, it's a church that has promoted many times the role of women. And in these books, there's chapters and stuff and historical examples of all these things. So I can't remember them all. But charity, compassion, and the poor. So it's the church many times, and particularly in really around the world and throughout history, that has many times cared for the poor and not neglected them and tried to do in some way benevolence toward the poor. Orphans, widows, obviously it's a biblical injunction. So many examples about that. Caring for the physically sick. And there's, again, some great examples here of how that's happened, and medicine and physical care all have certainly a great Christian influence. Christianity's impact on education. And again, an example of that is the volunteer movements that came out of this Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening, and the push in America in the mid-1840s, actually 1830s and 40s, of everyone, not just the rich or the privileged. Of course, the English did that as missionaries went around the world in the 1700s. And so the systems, particularly I know in Africa, are very British. India, probably the same kind of influence in that. So where Christianity has gone, education has gone. And that's a big,
I'm reading right now called The Pioneers. It's written by David McCullough, the famous author that wrote the Pulitzer Prize on John Adams. And in it, he's talking about how what became the states of Indiana truth in that was, unlike anything else previously, because some of the leaders for that, to settle that part of the West, were pastors. And for the very first time in history, not only did they outlaw slavery, but they also made public education free. So it's pretty, it's just, you know, it kind of is what you're saying here.
Yeah. Again, these are just broad strokes, but these are issues that we can still address. And so if you have an opportunity to speak to teachers, the gospel, maybe you could trace the impact of Christianity in education. And maybe point out some things that they didn't realize or never taught, or maybe they forgot, but how they had the privilege of learning, or why maybe they went to a private Christian school that maybe is no longer Christian, but why did it start? How did it start? So many schools in America started through the church, through pastors, through Christian educators. Labor and economic freedoms. Can't think of anything right now.
And just focus on that. And it is only through the power of the risen Christ that people will be transformed from the heart.
Right.
But not using gimmicks which have been used for a very long time.
Yeah.
People now have become intelligent. You see, like people who say they perform miracles and all that, people now can replay the videos, algorithms check on what happened, and these gimmicks are being exposed. So the only thing which can save Africa is only preaching Christ and the risen Christ and His power for people to be transformed from the heart. Yes, that's my thought.
Amen. Amen. Naomi, you haven't said anything this morning. You want to close it out here?
In Uganda, well, I guess like Alan said, the colonial rule, when it came with the Christianity at the same time, the Bible in this hand and the gun in this hand. So people still perceive it that way. They know those who are into Christianity are just people who still want to bring colonial rule back. It is just, it was a method of being ruled. But still, Uganda is a Christian country. It has freely embraced Christianity all through. There's no problem preaching. In fact, we don't have that kind of freedom that people have here. I'm free not to hear it is even almost forced. People preach on the streets, people will preach in taxis, and you will not do anything about it. In fact, the moment you start saying, I want my peace, live in peace, it is the crowd itself that will jump on you and tell you, we want to hear, we want to listen. But still that has made people, they've listened to it so much that it has just become a norm. I'm a Christian, it's a norm. It's our culture, we are Christians. So they've taken it for granted. That's why you find much as it has the biggest number of Christians, but they are not actually Christians per se. They are just there. They find themselves into something they don't know. And they are just in Christianity in that form. But the impact the positive impact it has done, if I look around the schools we have, all missionary schools, hospitals and missionary hospitals. Most of the development we have in Uganda is built by missionaries, and it still stands and still moves on very well. So at least they came with that kind of format that has helped people know that Christians help. Christians, and we are living on it up to now, up to today. So that was the positive impact that Christianity brought. But like he said, we need new ways of preaching the gospel. People are used to a Jesus film. People are now used to the moment you stand up and start speaking vocally, immediately they know this one has come, it's just going to start telling me about Jesus, and you know. So we need new approaches that will catch the people's attention.
And maybe to add an extension of what she has said, the issue of fundraising in Africa puts people off. Because the moment a preacher preaches, the aid is offering. You see, people are like, they are tuned to the end result. The end result being to call people to Christ and to follow up on them. Many people don't want to be identified to the head, because the head is offering. You see, I think the
Than
church,
the altar.
yes, the church needs funds, the ministry needs funds, but we need other ways of making the fund not to become the real issue, the big issue, because there is also a put off for many people. Even if you come with big crusades and all that, anyway, the issue of fundraising, we need to have a new approach.
And
Right.
another thing that I've noticed, the fact that everyone knows Ugandans, when you talk of Jesus, they will know you're genuine, they know. So even the devil has penetrated the church. We have big cults, we have actually a serious, good, serious shrines. They are well known. You see, even the way the pastor does things it's not, there's nothing godly. There are those that don't even have to preach. He just comes in and gives you what are they called, a tree to go and plant, and he will tell you it has unlocked all your blessings. So people go there well knowing what is going on in that place. But the person is called a pastor, the place is called a church, and they conduct services like any other. And because it's a country that has freedom of worship, there's nothing they can do about it. So the devil has also masqueraded already. He's living among the children of God. And for those who do not know the scriptures, who have not been given a good foundation, they fall prey. They don't know how to differentiate between a true servant of God or a true church, something like that.
That cult in Bosoga, it has buildings that look like churches, and the founder, although he's dead, went around saying he was Jesus,
Yes.
but he never rose. Wait, do you remember the name of that cult? I don't remember the name of it.
It's in Bosoga. The one I know
Middle
is,
Central Park.
the one I know is in Fort Portal in the west. There is, he calls himself Obishobolozi, the literally meaning the one in charge. He is the Almighty. That's what he calls himself. And his believers say, we pity you. You serve a Jesus who died and no longer lives. Ours lives. He's here. We can talk to him. And he's the Almighty. Yeah.
Can I add something? Also when we say Christian, I would say there's also a clear distinction. There was the Catholics did more in terms of social impact. So most of the mission schools and hospitals are actually Catholics. And they did more socially than, of course, in evangelism and winning souls. It was more of a social gospel. But then with the rise of the evangelicals and maybe Pentecostals and all that, the charismatics, there has been more emphasis on the spiritual and very little on the social. And so most of and that's why I think most of the people sort of don't relate so well with the evangelicals, because they preached so much about heaven than being earthly relevant. And unfortunately, also with the rise of the charismatics, they've been a lot associated with manipulation and, of course, prosperity theology, fake miracles, and
what I've seen also in terms of leadership, the power distance, the leader and the follower, is slowly, with enlightenment and education and literacy levels going up, it's narrowing down. And as it is narrowing down, people are questioning leaders. For the first time, people are speaking against the president. I mean, people can criticize, and you've seen the uprising in the northern. Actually, I was reading Malawi, there's right now a sort of a revolution. There was a revolution in Sudan. You know, they kicked out President Bashir, and right now there's a revolution in Malawi. Right now, I think going on. They're marching and kicking out. So the power distance is narrowing down, and so the accountability levels. You know, there's a lady, a sister who raised that issue. The accountability level, the pressure is high from the follower, from the flock. Yeah. So I think I would say there's that change coming on, and so the preacher, actually, there recently a very famous preacher was cursing people and saying, you know, if you don't want to be in this ministry, get out. Today, his church was demolished. So people no longer fear this thing that, you know, this leader was a mystery, and so it's more, I think it's the contribution of globalization. Yeah. And so Catholicism did more socially, but did very little in terms of the gospel.
Okay.
Now the evangelicals did more on the gospel, but did very little. And so there's...
Yeah.
Okay, we probably need to take a break. You can keep talking, but 15 minutes, and Mark Appleton is to join us.